Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for starting 10 minutes late. As you know, Nairobi can be unpredictable. Nevertheless, we are here. We have a great team ahead of you for this social media week. I understand there's no MC, so I'll try to be both MC and the moderator. So I'll give, since the panelists, in terms of gender balance, I'll start with my far left for the introduction. Then we go like that.
Hello? Great. My name is Alemu Emron. I'm the Chief Creative Officer at betika.com. I'm an advertising creative, writer, filmmaker, Creative Awards show judge, father, occasionally a good friend, depending on the situation. But yeah, that's who I am, and I'm glad to be part of this panel. Excited, so yeah.
Let me see. I couldn't make it work. I tried. Good evening, everyone. My name is Divine Muragijimana, a dollar for anyone who can say that name, last name. I am a Pan-African storyteller, lover of good stories. I don't think I can beat Emron's because I don't have children. You know, I am a good friend though, so occasionally when you want a good friend, I'm here for you. I work for Cellulant. I head their global marketing and communication across Africa, and I'm excited to share insights, but also discuss visual storytelling because it's like my favorite way of storytelling, so I'm really excited.
Hi everyone, my name's Lucy Kagia, and I work for Absa Bank. So Absa is a leading financial institution which has which is in 12 countries, and we believe in bringing possibilities to life, people's possibilities to life, and we pride ourselves in having an African heartbeat. So what that means is everything we do is inspired by the things that Africans do, especially Kenyans, always finding a way to get things done. And this is what we call Africanacity, and we love Africanacity. So my job at ABSA entails bringing people's possibilities to life, but through a digital marketing way and through visual storytelling, and that's why I'm here. And I'm more than excited to be part of this panelist. Yeah.
Wow, that's a tough one to follow, but I'll try. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shika Munga. I am the head of marketing for Google Kenya, and I also lead our marketing for Android across sub-Saharan Africa. For many of you wondering why Android we want to do in Africa is that you'd be surprised to know that of a continent of almost 1.1 billion people, only 300 million people are connected. And in a nutshell, we're trying to work hard along with several other partners across the continent to ensure that we can bring the power of the internet, the digital world, into the hands of everyone across the continent. And I think it's so apt being at Social Media Week because information technology is power, and I am very thrilled and honored to be amongst such talented panelists. So thank you very much for hearing us out and for being here for us today.
Fantastic. You guys, don't you believe I have the best team? Don't you believe that? In all brands, in all verticals, we have from Google, Cellulant, Betika. Good. Now let me introduce myself. I'm Robert Kuria. I'm a father, and I don't know. I'm a digital marketer. I've been in this industry for not like them. They are way there, but I'm getting there soon. But to kick us off, Our topic for today is visual storytelling. And to kick us off, I'll want Lucy to tell us how the Africa what? Nacity?
Africanacity.
Africanacity.
Yes, Africanacity.
Africanacity.
Yes.
How can you tell us about the Africanacity that tell us a visual story?
Okay, that's a great question. So, Africanacity in itself is a way that everyone has in them. Every African, every Kenyan has that one part of them that always wants to get things done. So in this context, we always, as marketers, want to tell a story, but visually, because I think, as statistics say, 80% of people will remember what they saw as opposed to what they read. So it's important to tell a visual story as opposed to a text story. So in an Africanacity setting, at ABSA, we have, looked at ways, especially during COVID times, that we can tell our story without, boring people. People already have COVID to deal with. They are not trying to deal with boring ways of being told stories or being told about products. So we took a step back and asked ourselves, what is this way that we can bring our products to life, but in a visual way? So I'm just going to highlight 3 things that we did. And one of them was invest a lot in videos, being a way of visual storytelling. And if I can go a bit into videos. What we did is we partnered we actually started a campaign called ABSA Stay Active. And what this campaign entailed is just that, staying active during COVID-19 times, because we realized people are locked at home, people are not able to go to the gym, people are not able to go for cooking classes. So what we did is we came up with a campaign called ABSA Stay Active. And in this Stay Active, we invested a lot of video content, we invested a lot of partnership with fitness gurus, chefs, travel experts, just to bring that activeness into people's lives. So just an example, we partnered with Shiv Simani. So every week, he would come up with a workout tutorial, go live on our Instagram pages, go live on his Instagram pages, and you'd have an hour of workout. And that found its way into YouTube as well, because with visual storytelling, with COVID-19, we realized a lot of content, visual content went up. That is on YouTube, on TikTok, platforms like TikTok came up, and that's where we were able to serve this content. So that performed well. It won us a couple of awards at Digital Media Awards. We are still receiving them. And that was one way. And then the second way we did this is through emoji campaign. So what we did is emoji being another way of visual storytelling, we came up with a campaign through, the help of our very able agency. So this campaign was typically an emoji, so a message, but written in emoji language. So what we did is we put it up on our digital platforms, and we were going to award anyone who was able to decipher that message. Nobody won, and we were giving 100,000 to anybody who was going to win, and nobody won. And again, we are going to be running it every year until we get to like 10 million, where we can't award. But it's interesting how much you can do with visual storytelling.
It is interesting that you say that, and I want to throw this to Alem, because he's a creative person. Let him tell us how he understands the visual storytelling to win that.
To win that emoji sci-fi.
Hello? Okay, I think it's my mic. So visual storytelling actually, the definition is very simple. It's when an image is used to deliver a message. It's that simple. But this could be anything. It could be a piece of art. It could be a print ad. It could be a cartoon. It could be a TV series. It could be the news. It could be, any movie you want to watch. So I think in its definition, it's simple. When an image is used to deliver a message. However, it is also more complex than that, because it's as versatile as, it could go from those little notes we used to send in primary school with stickmen on them, and then you send them, to deliver a message to your homie in class, all the way to a feature film. Like an emoji is a way of visual storytelling, and so is Game of Thrones, how many seasons. So it is versatile. It is simple, but it is complex as well.
I like that. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna throw it to Shika you said about the film. How can you also help us understand the visual storytelling using data? Us knowing you, being in Google, you have these all data that you have at your disposal. And also you said, how many Android we have registered? 300 million. Tell us.
Great. So I think that's quite interesting. How I view visual storytelling is that there's the visual part of it, and then there's storytelling. These are like two binaries, if you will. I mean, we're all tech savvy here. If we combine the two, we're able to produce something that could be possibly unique depending on what combination you take. So visual is an element that can trigger emotion, can trigger a sentiment and engagement. And then storytelling is what brings the power behind whatever that message would be. Now, being part of the Google fraternity, as Robert said, we've got interesting platforms, YouTube being one of the leading video platforms that are being used currently. And YouTube is all about storytelling. I mean, how many of you must be engaging and following certain, content creators, different people who are talking about different things, attuning to your interests? So I think when it comes to storytelling, it's also a little bit of moving away from stereotypes, but looking at passion points and developing like user personas. So in a place like YouTube, it becomes relatively easier to then look at the traffic coming onto your channel or whatever content you've created, being able to then analyze and understand, okay, is this resonating with my audience? Is this not resonating? There are a couple of things, like I like to call them the ABCD, and I'm just going to try and see if I can run them down real quick. So A stands for attract. The first thing is really important about your content is to attract and draw in your audience. This could mean having a tight framing of your character, not having too much movement, but just enough movement to rope it in. The B is the brand. So highly recommended would be like introduce your brand in a video storytelling environment within the first 5 seconds. Because I'm sure many of you know that the rule has changed whereby we're only able to retain someone's interest for like a maximum of 4 seconds at one time. And it would only go beyond that if the content was interesting. The third would be to connect. And this is, I guess, where the power of data comes in as well, because you're telling your story, having that data, knowing what is it that, and in this case, I don't mean data as numbers only, but I mean insights, user insights. What is it that matters to the person that I'm trying to talk to, and what is it that they're looking for? And the D would be to drive it into now action. For content, it could mean subscribe, to someone's channel, in the case of YouTube. For a brand, it could mean click onto the link that's there that represents the CTA. For someone who's trying to get more and more people, it could be, the tagline, whatever the tagline might be. And it's helpful to have the call to action embedded in terms of text or other formats, such that you can encapsulate all of this together and it becomes worth your users' time. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you got that, but just to recap, the ABCD, as I like to remember it, is attract, brand, connect, and drive. So it's literally as simple as that.
Fantastic, Shika, for that. Then I want to Davin to tell us about the $1 second name that I can't pronounce also. How she understands about the visual storytelling. Over to you.
Thanks. You still have to try and at least you have $1 in the bank just if you try the name. So I think the one thing, and I'm really keen to hear how this conversation pans out, because we've been telling stories visually for a long time, right? So visual storytelling is not something that just popped up. What has been interesting, and from a brand perspective, and what we've observed, even with Seduland, for example, when we went back, we went home, and we were separated from our teammates for about a year and a half or so, how much visual storytelling actually changed. It's really morphed to a place where we're now telling visual storytelling digitally, right? So that's the biggest shift that I have seen in the last year. And more importantly, are adopting digital visual storytelling, and you don't have to explain to the world or your boss or your finance why you're going to produce, why you're going to spend, let's say, $100,000 to actually do a really good video or an ad. So I think what has shifted is that we've been telling stories visually. Marvel Comics fans out there, anyone? Graphic novel? Yes, I see you there. So if you enjoyed, for example, things like graphic novels and you enjoyed ads, Nike, if you've loved Nike ads as long as I've loved Nike ads, or Apple, for example, we've really been telling stories visually for a long time. It's just that we had really relegated visual storytelling to big brands or the movies and so forth. What has really changed is that now visual storytelling is not only digital, but now brands are adopting it as a way of life, right? So you can't actually have, we were just talking about it, you can't have a digital strategy or a marketing strategy without thinking about influencers. Because TikTok, in the last 2 years, TikTok has completely shifted how we tell stories and content. So I think what really has, again, what has shifted is that businesses are realizing that you can't connect to your audiences who process, like today, 60,000 times faster visual content than plain text, that you have to actually invest in digital storytelling. You have to invest in doing it well and in a way that, you know, as Cellulant says, we do it the Cellulant way. You want to do it the way your brand really does well brand.
I love it. And I like how you said about the Nike. And what's the tagline for Nike?
Just do it.
Yeah. So I'll ask our audience to pronounce Davin name, the second name, and there's a bottle of wine or whiskey that's correct. Say it. For it.
They can't cheat. They win. People who work for Cellulant cannot cheat. They are cheating. They work for
Cellulant? No.
They work for Cellulant.
No.
Those ones can't.
Yeah. You go.
Muragijimana.
She got it,
She
right?
did it. She did it.
Fantastic.
So,
Look for me after.
bottle of wine. Can you imagine? You just won.
And to make that bottle of wine count, I'll go back to Lucy. Yeah. Just tell us about how you said you work for ABSA. You are the people who keep our money. We don't know if we get interest.
I don't like how that one is going, but okay, bring it on.
Yeah, but I would like you to tell us how you use data
Yeah.
in your content creation.
Okay. All right. So before I answer your question, it's interesting that, Devin, you said storytelling didn't just begin, and it's so true. As I was sitting with my desk over there, he asked what topic we are coming to discuss, and I said visual storytelling. It has a way of bringing you back, and you're like, so what is visual storytelling? And then you realize it's the same thing we've been doing over and over again. And I was reading an article the other day that visual storytelling was actually the first form of communication. And it came out 35,000 years ago, way before text came up. So I thought that was an interesting factor. And then to add to what said, your ABCD, I also have my way of defining visual storytelling, and to me, it's not visual storytelling if it doesn't factor in some of these three things. And the first one is, of course, it has to evoke an emotion, and because if you have an image, it has to evoke a certain emotion, and it has to be a desired emotion. And this speaks to it goes as to the basics of what your brand stands for. Is it the brand color? For example, Safaricom has a green color. What emotion does that evoke? We have the red. Red is our color. It's warm. Our colors are actually inspired by the African sunset. So what that means is that we are warm, we are passionate, just those basics of what your brand stands for and what emotion it invokes in people. And then second is, if you're storytelling, it has to be a conversation, because if you're talking to yourself, then you're not storytelling. You might have a nice visual, you might have a nice video, but then nobody's talking to you. So at the end of the day, you can't say you're visual storytelling because nobody is speaking to you. you. And then the last one, which is my favorite, it has to have 3 characteristics. It has to have a setting, it has to have a conflict, and it has to have a resolution. And conflict, I'll just touch on conflict and resolution because conflict is what sells any story. Game of Thrones, you spoke to Game of Thrones, and if anything put us on our toes is the conflict within that movie, series, all the challenges that were coming up, all the things we didn't know were going to happen, that's what kept us glued to our screens. So if your story does not have a conflict, and by conflict it means what it is that you're trying to connect to the audience, so it has to solve a conflict or a challenge that your audience is experiencing. And then now the resolution comes through, which is where you save the day. So you talk about this challenge or this problem that your audience is going through, and then as you walk away from that conversation, you provide a resolution. And it can be a product, can be a service, because that's what tells a nice visual story. So to the question of how we use data, and is this where you are afraid of how you use your data because your money is in the bank? Okay. So yesterday I sat through the Oracle presentation of data security, and it was very insightful just to hear how robust, what do we call them, hackers have become, and how much data has become like a key part of marketing. Nowadays, they're calling it the oil of marketing. So there's nothing much you can do really if you're not using your data. So what we do internally at ABSA is we'll, for example, use our database to understand what Robert likes. So for example, if we realize that Robert drives a lot on weekends, fuels his car, or uses his card to fuel his car, and he uses his card internationally, globally, then we have a persona for Robert. And we can tell Robert has a credit card, Robert likes to travel, Robert uses his credit card at a fuel station, and probably Robert is a single guy because we've never seen him pay school fees or do any of these family things. So that gives us a persona of who Robert is. So when we're coming to visual storytelling, then we will craft our message or our visual in a way that communicates to Robert at the stage of life he is. So we will not use children or we will use something that relates to you. Probably we'll have a visual or a video of a guy driving with windows down by the beach, with a nice phone, just talking to his friends, because that's who Robert is. And as we look for Robert, of course, then we'll get 20,000 other Roberts and Lucys who we then get to communicate to in a certain way. So I think that's the way we are using data, at ABSA.
Guys, don't you think Robert and Lucy have a good life? Driving on the beach, windows down, talking on an iPhone, driving a Benz, one day, ML350. And now, Lucy has brought up a very interesting question or a point that I would want Shika and Alem to help us understand better the visual storytelling. Gender balance, we start.
Okay, you go first.
We go with you.
Okay.
You're the creative.
Yes, I am.
You're the creative. She talk about color.
Okay.
Tell us what you feel about visual being a medium that's static. How is it limiting? Because she said a lot about she's driving the beach, windows down. She talked about color. I think she said blue or yellow. I'm bad in color. In red. Passion, yeah. Yeah, so tell us.
So I think one of the big misconceptions about visual storytelling is that having to tell a story with a static visual is more difficult. And a lot of people believe that you need to add something to the visual, maybe make it audio-visual. A lot of people in this room will agree or believe that the gentleman behind that camera will have an easier job telling a story than that gentleman over there who's taking stills. I believe that's partially incorrect. I think it's harder. And over years, one has to develop the craft. And I believe if you start with the harder things, then the simpler things become significantly easier. So if you're thinking about the visual, you have to look to craft and select the right visual for the message that it will deliver. For example, if we put a picture up here of rain hitting a road, I believe everyone in this room will know what that smells like, isn't it? Yeah. If we put a visual up here, I saw a visual last week of a kid, you know, with a mango, with a juicy mango that's been eaten, and then the mango the juice is dripping down the kid's hand. Everyone in this room knows what that tastes like. If we put a visual up here of any African market, anywhere on this continent, any African market, bustling, everyone knows what that sounds like. Now, without adding audio or anything else to those visuals, you can smell them, you can taste them, you can hear them. So static media does not mean you're incapable of telling a story. On the contrary, it's really about crafting, and we're talking about production, an amount of time you have to spend looking for that right image and allowing people to decipher what you're trying to say. Again, Lucy spoke of emojis. One emoji can tell a massive story. It's a little graphic element. So yes, a lot of people believe that static media is limited. I think it just means you have to work a little harder. So yeah.
Thank you for that. I think what I'm going to do next, I'm going to combine your question, her question, and I invite Shika to tell us what kind of tools can we use to make this visual storytelling better. You know, we want to bring it to life so that, for example, her, when she sees that, she says, enyewe hawa jamaa walifikiria hii kampeni ni noma.
Okay, so I think I'll share a couple of experiences that I've been, and some of the work that I've been involved in over the course of my career, and not necessarily alongside Google. But one of the very interesting researches that was mainly about a new brand wanting to launch into Kenya was around what is the color, since we spoke about color and the visual impact, and what that does. And I want you to think about color, keeping in mind what Alemu said around, it actually makes you feel what that could smell like, what that could taste like, even that sensation that you get of, you know, like the droplet of the mango dropping down your wrist. So the interesting thing, and I don't know how many people would agree with this, but it would be good to know maybe by a show of hands, but would you believe if I said that there were 3 peculiar colors that appeared to be appealing to the Kenyan audience, and that if brands chose those colors, they would have a better appeal? So the first one I think is a little bit of like a no-brainer, which is the passion color, which is red.
We ask
okay, guesses.
The audience. Yeah. We can pick randomly. You said how many colors? 3? So.
Are they getting wine?
Color number 1.
You started.
So we can give a mic somewhere there, the middle of the table. Or we can start the color.
Green.
Let's go.
Green. Green.
If you're Safaricom employees and you're compelled to say green, we understand. It's okay, your job's not at risk.
Red.
Purple.
So you have 3 colors already. So continue telling us the story.
So actually 2 of those colors are right. Unfortunately, green is not it, as much as we see a lot of it in Kenya, but it's not the one that actually did evoke a strong emotion. But surprisingly, the one that was an outlier to me was definitely purple, because we don't see it as much. But through the research that was done, and this was against like broad segments of audiences, so purple seemed to evoke a very warm, nice, fuzzy feel that gives you comfort. So people said that purple would be a brand that, purple's a color that they would want to have in anything that's around comfort. Red, as Lucy rightfully described, evokes a lot of passion, strength, drive, and so on. It's got a lot of powerful emotions that it kind of embodies, so color is so significant. And the third one, interestingly, was black. And a lot of people said that, have you ever looked at the Kenyan roads There was a fourth one as well, which was an add-on, but it wasn't really a brand color, which was silver. But a lot of people were like, have you ever seen the number of black cars on the Kenyan roads and why it is such a thing to pick up the color black? For many people, denote a sense of achievement, accomplishment, also quite parallel to luxury in its own way. So I think what I want to come down to is that ultimately the user insight and what it matters or what it means to the user, and in fact we were having this conversation just before we walked up here, that many a times we may be sitting in boardrooms or meeting rooms or being on set for things and brands or producing for brands that we may not be the target audience for. And I think if there's one thing I want to leave with you guys is the power of knowing your. It may be overly simplistic, but it is, I think it's highly overrated that we need to focus on all the other aspects, but if you start from where the user is and understand the user wants and try to then message it and position it and package it in such a way and then hand it to them, you've probably done more than 70% of anything else might be able to invoke in terms of a response. So I think my giveaway for today would be always remember, I think, begin your journey at the user. In this case, your user could be in different forms. It could be businesses, it could be individuals, it could be groups of people. But if you know your user well, 100%, you're going to know how to tell the story in the beautiful ways that Alemu described.
Good. So I'm going to call Davin. I hope I pronounced it right. Know your user.
You had the audience, right?
Know your user. Know your user. So I want you to tell us, how do you leverage business on creating content that's visually appealing or driven to your users? As Shika has said, Lucy has said, and Alan. I think you have a lot of content to share with us.
I think I have a lot of content, but I think I will also use like a lot of examples of what I came back home about 7 years ago, and I loved New York, great stories that I told there, but I came back home, and the first thing that I really wanted to do was teach businesses, and in this case, actually ended up being that I ended up at Sedulant, but really teach businesses on how to tell good stories and good visually appealing stories, because I think sometimes in the continent, you take it for granted that, you know, we're storytellers. I think you tell stories from the day you're born, right? Maybe you can't speak, but you're telling stories. Your parents are telling you stories. So because we're storytellers by nature, we don't actually bring that practice intentionally into our businesses. And one of the things that when we started really building the Sedulant brand, we were very intentional about knowing your user. Like what Shika said, know your audience. Knowing that, for example, we have millennials, right? And you've heard that they have a short attention span. No offense to the millennials who are sitting here, but just their ability to consume information is not as broad and as patient as, let's say, I'm going to put myself on the other side of the millennials, where you could sit for hours and read a story. You could sit for hours and watch like a TV ad that lasts for 3 minutes, and you're very patient, right? I think the first thing that as a business you need to know is who is your audience. Sedulant, when we started, we were very intentional about people. People and being very people-centric. So you'll find that in most of our communication, the face of the communication or the face of the story is actually either our internal people or our customers, right? Because knowing your audience, knowing first of all, customers are looking to connect. As much as a brand and as a business you're looking to connect and get that customer, they're actually also looking for you to tell them a story that is different than any other thing. So the first thing that a visual story and a really well put together, this is why Emron is one of my favorite creatives. So Kat is out of the bag right now. So, I mean, Emron is one of my favorite because I've really not met a creative who can look at a brand and say, this is what you need. You're a people-centric brand. For example, at Sedulant, we're very, very people-centric because we believe, you know, in the fact that the only way that the continent moves forward is by having great people, great customers, and great talent in our offices. Every day that somebody comes in and walks in, they're connecting to the brand. So when you understand that you have, one, external customers, two, internal customers, you start telling stories differently because your internal customers are millennials. And then your even upcoming customers or your prospective customers are actually interacting with millennials all the time. So the minute you realize that, you start changing the way you tell your stories. And then two, once you realize your audience, then you also realize that they are probably, as I said, 60,000 times more likely to consume a visual ad, a well-told story, than plain text. You change your strategy. And then the thing you start doing is looking at the content that you have to develop. We've spent a lot of time investing in young producers or photographers who come in our offices, and we're very pedantic about it. We're very unapologetic. You will take your photo. You come on camera and tell us your story. We want to go and talk to the customers and make sure that as much as we're telling the Ceduland brand story or the Ting story about the product, we are telling the story of the customer, of the consumer at the end of the day. So when you start realizing that you know your customer, you know your content, you know your brand, you know what your brand actually stands for, then you start looking at the content around you. You repurpose it. And then not only do you repurpose it, you now turn it to digital. No one is going to go out and take a video tape or what? What is the other one? Is it CDs? DVDs. No one is going out picking up DVDs. Everybody is interacting with their phone. So you start actually making not only content that is consumable digitally, it's short. TikTok has spoiled us now. So if anything is beyond 2 minutes, you scroll up, right? So how do you tell stories? You repurpose the content, but you repurpose it to be consumed digitally. If you as a business can do that, if you first know your audience, then repurpose your content to make sure that the content is towards your audience, that your audience is part of the story. Then repurpose that content to be consumed on the go. I think you will win.
I just want to add here, and I feel like you've spoken truth to power, because what you spoke about in terms of millennials and the Gen Zs and their shorter attention span, and I spoke a little bit about YouTube earlier, but I just want to share that even a large organization, that is getting more aware of the user consumption habits, we've also re-looked at the whole concept, and we're redefining our products and moving not based on what's working for us or what's technology, but what's happening within the user consumption patterns. So on YouTube now, we're offering 60-second and 15-second shorts because that's what the market demands. And while that may not be similar to what the core YouTube brings, but that's what the user needs. And ultimately, if that's going to help, monetize for the content creators, then so be it, because you got to keep evolving. And true to your point, that this is a concept that has existed from so long ago, and I think many of the marketing concepts are from like ages ago, and there's so much truth and power to like what you've said, because it almost boils down to the most simplistic things. But it's just about
you're giving them secrets. We're supposed to be cool, and like marketers are supposed to come in and be innovative. You're revealing that we're using old tricks.
The idea is that the thinking should remain fresh. The concepts can be old. Yeah.
And make it short, as she said. Yeah. So as we want to take a glass of water, I want to throw this question to Alem. Yeah. They've talked about brand. They say they want to keep the content 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 30, 60 seconds or less. Otherwise, you scroll up. So as you take your glass of water, think about this question. Why have the brands increased the use of visual storytelling? And as we take a glass of water, I want to throw a question to our audience. And again, I keep my word. Who wins? Get a bottle of wine or whiskey. I think Shika said A, B, C, D. Who can remember what she said?
Attract, brand, connect, drive.
Well done to the backbenchers.
Thank you.
I think our audience are well entertained. Are we taking our glass of water? We continue?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Alan,
Yes, just repeat the question.
the question was, we talked about brands, and that was Davin who said about if your brand content is more than 60 seconds, you scroll up. Then Shika came in and said they have come with these formats where they are doing 15 seconds, 30 seconds. Why have the brands increased the use of visual storytelling using those kind of formats? Or as a creative?
Yes. So why have brands really invested heavily in visual storytelling? Well, we're all aware of what happened in the last year and a half. Actually, to answer this question, I'm just going to ask if everyone can stand up. Just everyone in the room, if you don't mind. If you can stand up, please stand up.
Everybody stand.
Everyone stand up, please. If you really enjoyed the last year and a half that COVID messed up the world, stay standing. You enjoyed the COVID period? Like, if you enjoyed that period of the last year and a half when COVID messed up the world, if you had a good time, you weren't affected, life was swimmingly perfect, stay standing. Okay? No, sorry, because I'm asking the question, that's why I'm standing. If the COVID era, the period in which we had COVID throughout the world, leaves you with positive vibes and great memories, stay standing. Okay, this is interesting. I'm curious. Why do you have positive vibes from COVID?
I will speak as a father.
Okay.
For the first time in my life, I spent time with my family for 3 months in the house,
Okay.
which never used to happen.
Okay.
So as a father, I knew my son's skills. I knew my wife differently. We were cooking together. We were bonding together, which never happened. So
Okay.
to me, it was about bonding and stuff.
Okay.
For me, I think the organization I work with last year was the most impactful because of the high teen pregnancy, and it was one of our main programs. So it was 1 year that we actually made more impact than any other. So that one I'm proud of.
Okay, cool.
Bonuses?
So, all right.
I think mine is the same as his because I got to spend almost actually the whole year at home with my parents and my siblings. And maybe there were some bad times, but most of it was good.
Okay.
I got to work from the house. I was pregnant when COVID began, and I got to raise my son until he was 9 months.
Oh, that's amazing.
For me, mine was a win because I got to open a business and it flourished.
Amazing.
I think for me, I dreamed of having a virtual life all round. And I did. The only thing I've not been able to make virtual was travel. But just like her, I got to start a business during COVID and it's blown up. So good vibes.
Okay. Yes. For me, we became more innovative. We created more innovations that were not there before. And we believe that we were able to reach so many people. We used to do a lot of billboards, but now we went online fully as Robbie Search. So with that, we were able to create and touch lives. People could work from home. We could provide them task management system that you'll be able to report from wherever you are, and it will give you all the metrics and all the report. And we got so many customers from wherever we are. We were able even to sell anywhere because people could call us, but only we could not work. But we could log in remotely, install system for you wherever you are, and we go on. And we believe it made an impact on our side.
I spent quality time with my family. I also spent time learning and unlearning, relearning, rebranding myself, and I was energized. So you should agree that this online business is the new normal.
Okay. And it's not going anytime soon.
Hi, I work for Mozokinju, and this is the time we got into the digital space. For the past 1 year, this is when we revamped our digital, and we got into this space in a bigger way. Yeah, so it's a good thing for us.
As well, for me, I think it was a win for me because it motivated me to go outside and look for things that I didn't expect to find. And through the business that I had started, it helped me to buy a car as well through this period of COVID.
Fantastic. Alan, you have a lot of content. Take us through.
So, to answer the question, so first of all, I had not anticipated that there were going to be that many people who were doing great during COVID. But I think we can all agree in the room, the majority of people relate COVID with loss of life and livelihoods. People died, so did businesses. Homes struggled because of lack of revenue or income coming into these households. So why, to answer your question then, Robert, why are brands investing heavily in visual storytelling? It's escapism, the need to escape. Why Hollywood, Nollywood, Bollywood make big bucks is not just about the amazing stories, but it's about where these amazing stories take you. For that 1 hour, 30 minutes, whatever period of time it is, you get to escape your reality. So yes, you had a bad day. Yes, your business shut down today. But a little bit of data that you have, you get to watch that episode that makes you feel a certain kind of way. And the era that we live in demands of that. If you go back to the way consumers used to consume advertising, if you go back to the 80s, by mentioning the 80s, I know some of you are young in here, so don't freak out. And I'm also not saying I'm that old. I was a baby in the 80s. But in the 80s, I just took a few notes. In the 80s, the consumer said, you have to inform me. Give me information about your product. Just let me know. Give me the facts, and I'll make a decision. In the 90s, it was convince me. What about your product's different? Because now there's a bit of saturation in whatever category you're in. In the 2000s, it was entertain me. So I joined advertising in the mid-2000s, and it was very clear. If there's no reward for the consumer at the end of your bit of visual storytelling, then we're not going to do it. Because the consumer is like, I'm taking time out of my life to consume this piece of content. You need to reward me with something entertaining. And then in the 2010s, it became disrupt me, and we're all talking about that. It became more than one screen. It was 2 screens, then 3 screens. So someone's on their phone, on their laptop, but their TV is still on. So you had to disrupt me, and a lot of agencies like TBWA became the disruption company. You have to disrupt people. You have to break through whatever they're consuming. But now in the 2020s, it's, from inform me, convince me, entertain me, disrupt me to understand me. And you were talking about 60 seconds, 30 seconds. You were talking about people, scrolling and moving on. If you're not authentic, if you do not show that you understand my current situation, if you're not helping me in this present time escape, then do not interrupt my episode 7 of BMF. I don't know if anyone is watching BMF, but if you're not, you should be watching it. I'm just saying, I wasn't paid.
Just tell us what BMF is. Me, I don't know.
Well,
or maybe others.
Well, it's a TV show, Black Mafia Family. Or Raising Canaan, 2 great shows. Again, I'm not being paid for this, but you should watch those shows. They're amazing. But do not interrupt me if you're not going to show that you understand me. So if you're not going to be authentic, I'm going to scroll. You are talking about people seeing themselves, Robert seeing himself in the communication. If I can't see myself if I can't see that you've gone beyond just putting someone that looks like me, but having content that shows that you understand my situation, then I'm going to move on. So visual storytelling right now serves the purpose of escapism, and brands are investing in it because it's helping them not just sell to their consumers, but connect with their consumers. And more importantly, I'm using the word consumer, I'm an ad guy, explainable, but then like Lucy was saying yesterday, you have to show people today that you don't just see them as consumers, but as people.
And I'll throw that question to Lucy to tell us, as a company you work for, which is heavily regulated, how do you create content that revolve what we are talking about?
Yeah, so that was amazing. I've learned so much from, I didn't know all those stats around the different centuries, so it's really good content. So yeah, we are regulated by, as you can imagine, left, right, center, and we have all of these regulators. And I think the biggest one being our parent company, because you have to follow certain brand guidelines. But I think the mistake maybe we make as marketers is confine ourselves within those brand guidelines. They're not there to restrict you. They're there to help you tell your story in a way that still remains true to your brand. For example, we can't use different colors, a green color, for example, because that's not who we are. We are a passionate brand, and that's why we used red. And like I was saying, when we did our brand colors, what we actually did is we took 130,000 consumers. Some of them were clients, customers, stakeholders, our regulators, customers, just to run them through what our brand stood for, our colors, our gestures. Our gestures are, whenever you see an ABSA advert, you'll see some like brackets that surround a certain copy. And I like to call them hugs because they bring that emotion of a hug and a warm hug. And basically what we use those gestures to do is to focus somebody to a certain message. So just bringing the consumer, those 130,000 consumers into perspective of what we were trying to do. Ask them, do you like this color? Like Shika was saying, purple was not a color they expected that would come out as a favorite color for Kenyans. So you have to go back to the consumer and ask them, what do you like the colors that we're using? Do they relate to you? Do they pass this certain message? And that's something that we were able to do. So as much as we are regulated, we were able to go back to the consumer and ask them how they feel about our brand. So that's one thing that we did. The other thing that we do a lot is, again, back to brand guidelines and what we stand for. Sometimes we may not have the best actors, as much as I'm a digital marketer, might not make the best jokes. So it means I have to partner with somebody who makes those jokes, or somebody who creates amazing visuals, because I'm not a creative. So I have to work with partners, with influencers. I think throughout this social media week, we've learned a lot and heard a lot about partnering with influencers. So just using people, ambassadors, to create content for you, content that you cannot create as a brand. So that's another way that we make sure that our visual storytelling, as much as we are regulated, is still getting to people, because sometimes, yes, our clientele is of a certain age, a certain economic status, but we also want to connect to the other target, because we are a brand that prides ourselves in being here for everybody. So we'll ask, for example, the Gen Zs to create amazing TikTok videos just showing what Africanacity means to them. So just making sure that you are addressing everybody in a way that they understand. The same thing to Sheng. We might not write the best Sheng or even talk Sheng in our pages, because we are trying to communicate to everybody. But then when we work with partners, they can speak Sheng, and people who follow them or people who relate to them will be able to understand what it is that we're trying to say. Yeah.
That's some good insight there. I think what I'm getting from this conversation is that data is the king. And data being king, how can we use data to be on the competitive edge? And I think this question, I'm going to give it to Shika, because she handles a lot of data. Are you able to tell us something around data and how it brings this whole TikTok, this whole sharing, this whole about $1, I can't pronounce that name, to life?
So, well, rightfully so. I think data is very important, and I I think this is like a world event question anywhere that Google's ever been. What do you do with my data? How personalized is that data? So I think first and foremost, I think I just want to like put that away around the fact that, just like Lucy mentioned, so data is used to inform how the users or the customers can be served better. But when we're dealing with a magnitude of data in terms of search queries, in terms of people wanting to Google, I know, like, in fact, I should probably ask this question and say how many people actually watch out. Towards the end of the year, we do a press release and we talk about the top 10 topics that have trended on Google the most in Kenya. And typically, that's like really sought after because everyone wants to know what is it that people are searching for.
We ask the audience, which is a trending topic today?
Well, it's not something I can confirm, so it may not have an output. But,
no, they can tell us.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
What do you think might be the top?
What's top trending today? Wow.
Good. See, that was a unanimous view of stick to the lane. But yeah, so what I wanted to say was that when we talk about data, and I know Devine also alluded to, Lucy alluded to listening into the data privacy elements that were being discussed. So data privacy within the technology world is very, very important. And I think most of the brands, many of the people in this room also are very conscious and conscientious about how their data and information is used. So first and foremost, I just want to like probably put it out there from a Google perspective, all of the data is aggregated. So I will never be able to tell what does Robert want, or what does Lucy want, or what does Devine or Alemu want, because it's all aggregated. So I sure am able to say that Kenyans are leaning towards wanting X, and South Africans are leaning towards Y, whereas this trend is so popular in Tanzania for so-and-so reason. So data is extremely powerful, and I mean, our entire revenue side of our business is based on data and information and how we can serve you better. And to all of the points kind of that have already been said here around, you don't want information, for example, I'm going to use Lucy's hypothesis and say Robert doesn't want to be served ads about baby food. And if I am serving you ads about baby food, I have an option there that says this is not for me, with like probably an angry face, right? Like, stop serving me baby foods, as an example. So data is very important, and information that it gives you in terms of aggregation and direction all around the user. I think it just boils down to how you're going to use it. Like they say, data on its own is nothing, but data along with a story becomes a compelling fact and a statistic. So you can reference it, you can use it for something more credible. Data speaks for itself that social media has strength and power. We were just discussing before we walked up here to the stage that back in the day, like literally even as at 5-7 years ago, if you put digital marketing as part of those line items within a budget, it would be like, okay, it's a nice to have. If you have some extra cash, you know, we could do influencer engagements, and you really had to kind of be jumping in your seat to convince someone. But data represents and shows that today, digital media, digital marketing, or anything around social media investments and influencer engagements and so on and so forth they're credible enough purely because of the data and the story that comes along with it, because it's got proof points. So data that is qualified becomes an insight. So any information that you have that is then qualified becomes an insight, which becomes powerful to make any decisions for your business thereafter. Since we are talking about so many stats and data, like I want to leave you all with another stat, which I found quite groundbreaking, which was that over the last, and we talked a lot about how the pandemic has been and the impact that it has had on different brands. But did you know that today we're towards the end of 2021, but we are where in terms of digitization, so we've had a leapfrog. We are where we were expected to be organically growing in 2030. So we have an 8 years like head start. which is fantastic for our continent, for where we are today, where digital first is still not digital first fully. So I think like weeks like this and you know, discussions like these open up our perspective and give us a wider view around how these things are so important and why they're so important in the evolution of our industry and in where we are market as a continent in the world. It starts to put us on the map. So technically when, you know, when you're having a rough day around why sales are not doing so well or something, just remember you already have an 8-year head start. Imagine if you didn't. And congratulations to everyone who created a fantastic business for themselves and flourished through what the pandemic was. I guess that was the silver lining. But there's so much to be grateful for, and I think we're in the right place. This is the now, which is powerful. We have the power to change it. Divine, I want you to talk a little bit about what you want your legacy to be, because I found that quite moving. And when we talk about our legacies, like, I think purpose and soulful meaning, bringing it to your work, is what defines things and people. And so I want you to share with the team what you felt you want your legacy to be and why it's important to you, because you could have picked anything else.
Wow. Okay. So this
is
what happens when you have corridor conversations that come on stage. But I was just talking about and as I said, I love telling stories. And I started as a writer. So this is the background. I started as a writer. Was editor-in-chief for a long time. So I really love the written word. But what I came as I was working through Seduland, and really, you know, and I will thank my boss because he pushed me to start telling stories in a way that I had to expand my horizon. And through that, I have become a lover of production. So I love production. So Brian is here in this room, so he knows how much trouble, and Emron actually, how much trouble I give them, because I have loved production and being able to go in the background and tell stories and everyday stories of, you know, my favorite is staff at Seduland. So I love telling stories about our employees, but I love telling stories about employees who've left the business and they've gone and started their own businesses and they're thriving and they're becoming our partners. I love telling stories about our customers who are using our digital payments platform. So I spend a lot of time now actually dreaming about production. And so I was telling them that I actually want to retire to become a producer, because I feel like as a producer, as someone who is able to direct the way a story and the outcome and being able to showcase the best of that person, of that location, of that business, or this continent will outlive you. So my legacy, I want that to be my legacy, that I've produced stories that are going to outlive me in many years to come. So.
Great. And I wanted to throw this to you. Since now I connected you to Emron, can you tell us? I had to create a meeting for you guys to meet. Tell us how you drive brands awareness, traffic, and support for business growth, because you have this amazing story that you want to tell us.
Well, wow. Emron, do you want to take that? So let me say the things that I've learned over time, and then how I use them in the business today. But it's really around 4 things. 1, it's empower, educate, inspire, and then connect. Empower, educate, inspire, and then you connect. And this is how it's played out for businesses. So everybody, I mean, those guys who are here, who are young business owners, I have found that the best thing about COVID is that we've all become Hollywood producers. We've become our own storytellers. So even though my dream is to become a producer, I think every business, in essence, has become a production house in some sense. You have producers in-house. So the best thing to do is really try to figure out, how do I build visually exciting content that is going to first empower the users, because you're no longer the storyteller, right? It used to be that brands will talk. So, I remember my first ad at Seduland. I was talking about how fantastic Seduland is. We're in this many countries. At that point, we are in 18 countries. So I was really excited about telling the story of Celluland and how we're transforming the continent. And over the last 2 years, I realized I can no longer be the storyteller of Celluland, right? I can't tell the Celluland story better than the person who uses our Ting platform, for example. So you have to empower the users to become the storytellers for you. So this is, this is why you've had UGC, like it's a term, if you've ever received a marketing plan or a marketing proposal from an agencies, if you're here, you know that's true. But you hear UGC, right? User-generated content, because at the end of the day, it's no longer about you. It's no longer about you as a business. It's no longer about you as a brand. It's about the user. And the most powerful way to actually, tell a story is when the user is telling the story about you to their audience, right? So empower them to tell that story. The second thing is educate them. So what are they actually talking about? So educate them to become your best brand ambassadors. This means that you might have to do a bit of, testimonials or how-tos so that they learn about the product and they become experts at your product so that they can actually tell the stories. So you have to continually educate them. And this one, you cannot, you cannot educate without actually being able to say, do things like videos or motion graphic. And you really have to become very good at telling your story and educating your users on how to tell the stories about you. And then inspire them. Why should they care? Now, the thing about COVID, and it was before, we used to talk about, because we talk about Apple, so everybody here who is a creative, don't lie. You know that Apple is going to be, when you have like, what is the best brand that tells the best stories? Apple and Nike will come up, right? Because we were told Apple and Nike were the standards of how we tell stories because they were able to inspire. When you have to wait for a whole year to buy a phone that is costing probably half of your salary, right, per month, but you will wait and go and buy the iPhone. You will wait and have an iPad. You will wait and have a MacBook Pro. And if you go in as a creative and you go into a business and you don't ask for a MacBook Pro, then people start to looking too funny, like, are you sure you're creative? But because you've been inspired, you've been told that Apple is the best. So they've inspired you, and you tell the story freely to everyone. I have an Apple, and you are not even ashamed that you spend half of your salary. You will tell the story because they've inspired you. So as a brand and as a business, you have to be able to offer why, right? Why should people care about your brand? That's the first thing. And again, my boss, the first thing I spent, and I remember the first time I spent $50,000 to put an ad together, and then he just looked at me and said, okay, so why should people care? And, I did everything. I talked about the mission. I talked about, we have a vision to transform Africa, da-da-da-da-da. He just looked at me and said, like, nobody cares, And I realized, actually, that's the day I realized that you can't tell a story without asking why. Why should someone care about you? Why should somebody care about your business? So, the first thing at Celluland, in fact, the team that's here, so I'll give them a shout out, our content and PR team, the first thing I tell them is you need to lead with our mission. So the first thing you'll hear most of the time when you see a Celluland story is that we create prosperity and opportunity for all. We want to accelerate digital growth for Africa. That's the first thing they tell you because they need for you to care that we want to accelerate your growth, that we want to inspire, we want to create opportunities for you to grow. So you need to inspire. The last thing is connect. So most of the brands, it used to be now, and Amaron, I'm not sure how old you are, so I'm going to take a jive at the 80s, where you used to you could tell an ad, you could just put together a fantastic ad, like with the man and whatever, the spice ads. Anybody who watches spice ads? But it used to be you could just do a very nice ad and then leave it, like just let it do what it needs to do. You put it on TV, maybe you see a print ad somewhere, maybe you'll be in the middle of an event and then you leave it. But as the marketers and as a business, we are now learning that we need to create content and we need to create storytellers that are ever evolving. That you need to continually connect with your customers, with your storytellers in this case, not even your customers, your storytellers, and make sure that they're connecting to who you are as a business, make sure they're connecting to why they're in your ecosystem if you are building an ecosystem as a business, but you need to continually do the hard work of connecting, engaging, sending them emails every month to make sure that they've watched that video that you produced and ask them to produce it, to maybe replay it. This is where influencers actually come into play because they've done a great job of continuously reinforcing an ad or a message or any campaign that might actually outlive. Instead of 3 months, now campaigns can last for 6 months or even 8 months because you're able to actually continually connect. So I think with those 4 areas, if you start there, start with a phone, right? If you are small, start with a phone. If you can afford, get creative directors who can help you tell that story, or also get internal teams. So for what we've done at Cellulant, just an example, is that we've hired and we have on contract people who are at the, like if I call them today to come tomorrow to shoot a story, they can do that. And by working with young creatives, young producers to be like Brian, you are able actually to continuously allow yourself the agility to tell the stories on a continuous basis.
Fantastic.
Did I answer that question?
I'm moved. Now to add on to that what you told us, I will want to throw this question to Emron because he's a senior creative in the room, I'm assuming. You know, Silver Fox. We've talked about this good, nice storytelling. Is there that one format that you'll tell our audience that if they used it, as she said, you can use that story to tell for 6 months? That one ad format, or what you think as a creative director that should be the way to go?
I don't think there's one format. I think if you want your story to live beyond 6 months, like you said, you want to tell stories that will live beyond you, your story has to be authentic. It's that simple. It's not the format, it's the authenticity. There are ads that people watched when they were kids and they still remember today. There were ads, but they made them feel a certain kind of way. The ads you watched last week, you've already forgotten about. There are films that you watch, series that you watched when you were younger at a particular stage in your life that you can't forget. The movies I know word for word because the way the stories were told, they were real, you know. And how you go about that is you have to. The only way you get great at being authentic is by writing and writing and writing. If you look at any great artist, and I'm even just thinking visual artists, the likes of Picasso, what they do, when you start off, you don't develop your tone of voice yet, your style. You start your writing, you're writing like, if you're in an agency, you're writing like the senior writer you want to write like. You're writing like the guy who writes for Nike because you like Nike ads. Over time, you start developing a sense of your own style, but not quite yet. You start amalgamating different people's styles. Then eventually, because you've been doing it over and over and over again, you create your own style. And people start telling you, yo, man, I saw a piece of content. Was that you? And you're like, oh, snap, how did you know? Like, no, I know your style. I can figure it out. When I see something, it's yours. So the thing you have to do is start writing today. Start telling these stories today. When you get back home, tell that story. If there's one thing to any of the storytellers in the room that you should take from this is this. It can be intimidating to tell stories, you know, especially in advertising, if you have to go into a boardroom and present to say any of these ladies. That pressure of like it has to be a perfect story. That's a real thing. But if you're telling a story on whatever platform you have, your own platform at home, you know one of the places I learned to tell stories? In the pub. Because guess what? You can lie to your friends, they will never have any idea where that story came from. Practice storytelling. Practice with, you mentioned your son. Practice with your family at home, with your friends. Practice different ways of telling your stories until when you speak or when you tell that story, it's undeniably authentic. Then it will last 6 months, 6 years, 60 years, whatever it is. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And to add on to that, I think we've had a great session. I want to open this, the next 15 or 20 minutes for Q&A.
I like you.
Hi, I really had the itch to ask this question. And first of all, thank you so much for a really great session. I'm Onjera Kariuki from Turn Left Media, LinkedIn. So one of the things that we really get from most of our clients is when we are doing the advertising, there's a lot of people who are talking to business decision makers, and it's a lot of B2B marketing. I like what Lucy said about how you're using the data that you have about your clients to tell the story, yeah? But is it the same approach you use when now you're doing your B2B marketing? I mean, what have you done when you're doing your B2B marketing? What elements do you look at now? Because I don't believe, do you still go and look at that CEO's profile? Because this time you're marketing to his, for his business, yeah? And then also to Aremo, I also want you to answer this question more from a creative point of view on what do you think would work best for B2B, and what's the one thing that we are missing out on? Is it our starting point, or where do we start? Yeah, thank you.
I think we start with Lucy, then since Aremo is creative, he can wrap it up in a nice way.
Okay, thanks for that question. And it's an interesting question because, yes, data will help you learn a lot about individuals, and it can be quite hard to learn about businesses. But I think back to, what everybody has said, it's about your audience. So as much as it's a business, you have what they stand for or what it is that they are trying to achieve at the end of a financial year or at the end of 5 years. So it's really understanding them as your audience. As much as it's a business, it's still an audience. And they still have dreams and hopes of what they want to achieve. And then once you understand what that is, then you're able to craft your messaging or your visual messaging in a way that speaks to them. And I think the one thing that has worked really well over time is testimonials. So for example, you will use testimonials from different businesses and show them how you have been able to help that business achieve their goals or achieve their ambitions. And once I see that as a business, I'll also want to come on board because you have helped that one business. I don't know if that answers the question. Okay, great.
And I think from a creative point of view, so one, I think the testimonials are great because that's a peer review, and I think we were talking about peer reviews earlier. One thing that I always ensure that we do, or we as a team, when we're putting communication for B2B, is, of course, you have to be concise and all of that. You have to get to the point as quickly as possible. But you have to be very intentional in answering that one question for the person you're communicating to, which is, what's the problem that you're solving for me? Because this decision that's being made, when you're talking to consumers in general, a lot of decisions can be made using the EQ, the emotional quotient. And there's ways you can manipulate that. This is what we do. We're experts at that. But when you're talking B2B, the person making that decision is making a very intellectual, a very logical decision. So you have to get, your message has to be clear on what problem you're solving for them.
Can I add? And I think this is one of the biggest challenges. So the business we're shifting to B2B marketing. Might come for some advice there. But we have been running ads for B2B for quite a bit actually. But now we're now B2B2C. So you have to talk to the end users. One of the things I've discovered that was interesting, and it's an insight I recently got as we were running LinkedIn ads. Is that at the end of the day, the person who's making that decision is actually a person. It's a human being, right? Going back to what Emron is saying, the decision maker is going to be a human being who has interests and who probably their interests might not be going to drive by, in Miami with a Corvette, but their interests might be actually solving. So if maybe your CEO, you're targeting a CEO. A CEO is busy and probably has 1,000,001 things to do, but they are human beings who make very logical but very emotional decisions. I think this is one of the things people don't, you make an emotional, when you're looking at an ad or an engagement piece or a story, you do make a decision around your partners. It's a bit of an emotional journey, not just, a business as a whole. Behind a business is a bunch of people who are making the decision whether they are going to go with you or not. So as much as you want to also anchor, B2B is tricky because you want to feel like you're talking to a business, but you're actually not. You're talking to human beings. So if from your storytelling perspective, you want to figure out What is it that I need to communicate to that person who is going to be making that decision? What is their pain point? And then you nail into that point, you just hone into that pain point and show how you can actually solve that pain point better than your competitor. But at the end of the day, it's talking to a person. You're not talking to a business, you're talking to someone who is going to make that decision.
Ashika, do you have a comment?
I actually have a hypothesis. In my view, B2C advertising targets the right side of the brain, and B2B targets the left side. Since we're talking about B2B, it's just like most of my co-panelists have mentioned, it's like a flow chart, okay? I'm trying to solve this. Does it solve it? Yes or no? No goes straight away to stop. Yes takes me to the next step. Is this giving me the value in terms of, let's say, savings, or is it addressing what I'm trying to fit? Yes or no, and the no straight away goes to stop. So there's relatively lesser room for conviction around drawing someone in to feel a sense of emotion. I mean, it does happen. Of course, there are outliers to the whole concept, but that's sort of a very, again, simplistic way of looking at it, but it's quite a logical process, and one needs to lead toward the other. And just like Devine said, it's typically an individual or a set of individuals also making that decision. So with B2B, what you do is you turn it a different direction and look at the decision makers, and in this case, what is it that matters to them in order to make or qualify whatever that decision would be. So yeah, I mean, it's just a hypothesis though about the left and the right brain before anyone with some special neurosciences comes at me.
Wanjira, have we answered your question?
Yes, and given their really good perspective. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other?
Robert is so reluctant about any other.
Yeah, let's go. Question time. Give a mic. I thought she had raised her hand. Okay. Okay, I'll ask a question. We've been talking about visual storytelling. I want one person to tell us, in summary, the definition of visual storytelling. Then this comes a prize.
What's the prize? The stakes have to go higher.
The prize will depend on what my panelists choose as the correct answer. Who want to go first?
I think I'll give it a shot. First, from the word visual is something you are able to use your eyes and see. And storytelling, we know the meaning of storytelling. So from these two words, I see content from storytelling. So it's like message that is relayed through something you can see. Something like that.
I'll leave it at that. Somebody else?
For me, I would say visual storytelling is passing across a message, or rather communicating, because as you've been told, you cannot tell a story alone. You need to involve an audience. So I'll say it is communicating a particular message by use of visuals, things like photos, videos, or something that you can see.
I see you are following Elam conversation. Another one? Then I'll let Lista give
I think visual storytelling, I can say it, how you appeal to clients. How you appeal to clients and how you connect to your clients. That is the first impression you create.
Are you guys still listening to the answers? You'll give me a feedback of who wins.
I think visual is about how you get the idea first. Then from the idea you can get to relay the message out so that the user can get what you're trying to pass out.
Anyone else want to define?
For me, I think visual storytelling is passing across a message or telling a narrative without using too many words, by using a very short and precise photo, video, or audio message. But very short without using too many words.
I'd say visual storytelling is the use of image to deliver messages where you have the sole objective of informing while entertaining to keep the client or the one viewing or absorbing the message connected to you as you pass on the message, but using images.
I think visual storytelling is a story or a narrative that is told by use of visual media, and you don't have to talk much, but you can enhance these stories using music, graphics, and so many things to make the story more appealing.
I think if there's no other one, there's a question here to my panelist. Please go ahead and ask the question.
Hi, my name is Kezia, and I'm just a mom. So my biggest problem is I tell things in stories, so just stay with me. I have a question on a corporate level. So on ground, there's dust. All the content creators are now doing the thing, creating and and the floor is saturated. I mean, there's a lot of content creators now. Someone had mentioned that everyone's become a digital, we're all editors. We all understand editing suit. A long time ago, you say Lightroom, it was completely confusing, but now everyone gets it. And we're editing. And stories are being told and heard on the ground. Are you able to see that? And at what point are you able to come in and touch a story, pick it up, and pull it into the brand? For me, as a storyteller, I find myself moving stories with ease. But unfortunately, the market, the setup in Kenya is that you have to work your way up the numbers, which then loses the quality of the story. And by the time it's up where it is, you're now fighting on the number scale. You've now lost that juice, which is the reason why I think studies were showing last year that, I mean, the nano influencer has a really good reach on stories because she's penetrating the ground within the dust. How, on a corporate level, are you able to touch into a nano influencer and assess this story is going to have penetration and pick that element and make it work? I don't know, my story was long, but I don't know if you got it.
I think I have maybe the shortest, and then Absa here can take. So the first question was, are we listening? Are we paying attention? The answer to that is we have no choice, right? We have no choice but to pay attention, to listen, and most of the time have and ask for a lot of help. Because as you said, nano-influencers now, unfortunately, are a dime a dozen, right? And so it's no longer about the story, right? It's about the storyteller. So most of the time when brands, and I think there is, let me see, he's here. Remind me your name. Yes, Philip. Okay, he doesn't remember, but I used him a long time ago as one of my influencers a long time ago. And the reason why I picked him and not anybody else was because his storytelling, or his elements, and the way he actually carries himself as a storyteller aligned to my brand, right? So I chose that person, not because they had the greatest stories, but it's because they could tell the stories in a way that aligns to my values as a brand, aligns to what I want to achieve, and his audience is actually able to convert, because at the end of the day, you know, the business is going to ask us for conversions. So ROI on influencers. So it's not longer about the story, right? It's not about us paying attention to the story. It's about how you tell the story. It's you, the storyteller, that we pay attention to. And when we don't have this insight to actually tell whether you're a good influencer for us or not, we have help. We have Wowzy. I saw Wowzy is around the room today. So Wowzy actually helped me launch when we rebranded. We went to Wowzy and told them this is what we want to do. They give us a budget. They ran the campaign for us. They picked the right brand influencers in this case. And then for me, for conversion perspective, I also use AI influence. AI influence is a new it's a new, let's say, it's just a MarTech. It's a marketing technology or a business that has a marketing technology that allows us to match our brand to the right influencers, to the right audience. So if we can't pay attention, if we don't see you, there are those ones who we consult with that actually do.
Lucy?
Yeah, so to add to what my co-panelist has said, yes, we are listening, but at the same time, we are listening through partners, because at the end of the day, we really can't listen to everything that's being said. But through social listening tools like Meltwater, Brandwatch, we are able to pick up people who are telling stories in a way that connects to us. But now the challenge comes in, because when you're social listening, you have to speak to something that speaks to our brand. So either you're using a hashtag, you're using somebody who belongs to the business. It doesn't have to be a hashtag, but you could be mentioning our MD. You could be mentioning Lucy, who you met at a conference. But you could be mentioning anything that has to do with the brand, and we're able to pick that up as a story. So that's one way of listening. And once we do that, then we're able to and sometimes, you know, it's a human being who's listening or reading these stories. So if I like your way of writing as Lucy, who is listening to those stories, I'm able to bring you on board for the brand. If our agency is listening and picks up your story and probably don't like how you write, or they like how you write, that could be a make it or break it moment for you, unfortunately. But as Devin mentioned, we're also using partners like Wowzy, who do a lot of nano listening, because that's their business, that's their core business. So we'll come to them and tell them we have this campaign, or we have this message that we want to bring out. How are you going to help us? And they have amazing tools that are able to go on ground and pick up people who are aligned to what it is that we are trying to communicate. But I like what you said about you know, being a nano, your content is very rich, but then when you start getting numbers, now we start looking for numbers and not looking for the content. So I think it's a challenge for you to be as authentic and to remain true to who you are despite the numbers. And I think it goes back to, even if we want to come work with you as ABSA, and we tell you, no, you have to use our hashtag, you have to tag us, you have to use red colors. You can also make a stand and say, no, that's not what I want to do, that's not what my brand stands for, and this is what I want to do. And believe it or not, we respect you more for doing that, and we'll probably want to work with you more. Yeah, so it's quite not here nor there, but I think we are all listening, and the minute you speak to our brand values and what it is we are trying to achieve, we are more than happy to partner. Yeah.
You want to contribute something?
Yeah, well, first of all, hi, Kezia. Kezia is a friend of mine.
Hi, Kezia. Alem's friend.
You can't escape the numbers, unfortunately. And as a creative, I have climbed in the ranks, unfortunately. You know, when you're a copywriter, it's great because you can just tell the story. And once you're done telling the story, you present it, you leave, you go on a shoot, you produce, and you're done. But everything has to be justified with numbers, unfortunately. You were asking me yesterday, why did I sound tired on a call? Because I spent a whole day working on Excel sheets, trying to justify numbers. Reason is very simple. You deal with us, marketing people, brand people, and we're building a brand. But the brand is attached to a corporation, which is a business. And that business, we would answer into a CEO, and the CEO answers to the board answers to the shareholders, and all the shareholders care about is my dividend at the end of the year. It's numbers.
ROI.
Yeah, ROI.
Yes, return on investment.
Exactly. You spent this much, how much were we able to get? I don't care what the story is. I just want to know what my check looks like. So unfortunately, you can't escape the numbers.
Just to add a little bit into the numbers, just to, not to say that numbers are not important and budgets, and I mean return on investment is not important, but the beauty of it is now brands are moving away from just the money part of numbers and bringing in even things from a social media perspective. How are people feeling about your brand? The sentiments that people, the share of voice, those become very important numbers. So we might not share that with the board or shareholders, but it's a very important message because nobody wants to be associated with a brand that all people are saying is negative things, or nobody is even talking about them. So at the end of the day, as much as you don't bring that monetary value, you can bring in that sentiment, that sentiment value. So just to encourage you a bit, yes, you have to return money, but then there are also some numbers that we are looking at as a brand that you can be able to easily help. And we can partner, because that's the partnership. You might have small numbers, but we have big numbers. So you might have 3,000 followers on Instagram, we might have 100, but if you tell your story in a nice way, it becomes a win-win, because then we are able to co-create content together. But it has to be good content.
There's just one thing, yeah? And I'm going to be the outlier here. 100 million followers of the wrong kind are worse for your brand than 10,000 followers who, when I give you a campaign, you're able to give me at least 10% conversion on there. Because at the end of the day, I like numbers. I generally, actually, I'm probably the one person who, if you have 1 million followers, I will never work with you. And it's not, and Amron is going to kill me, and there's, Charity there is going to probably talk to me nicely after this, but it doesn't it doesn't really impress that you have 1 million followers. But if you have 10,000 followers, and out of those 10,000 followers, about 80% of them are engaging with your content, I'll go with you. Because you have the right audience who trusts you, who, when you say this is the brand to go for, they'll go for it.
No, I'm not going to kill you. I agree. But the reason I work with someone who has 10,000 followers over 1 million is just simply because they're easier to work with than 1 million followers. So.
I wanted to give a slightly different perspective, and I think your question was around at the corporate level. And I just wanted to say that, of course, numbers and all of that stuff matter, but for instance, as an organization, what we're doing and what we're very intentional about specifically across Africa in terms of our partnerships is to make sure that we have a very inclusive pool. Now, what that means is they could be the top tier that have all of the big numbers, but it also means their space is really crowded. To Alemu's point, they're relatively harder to work with, which frankly, ends up becoming the agency's job because we don't engage with them directly. And I think Rita can keep me honest here as well, that when I had a conversation with her about influencers, the first conversation, and she said to me, A, B, C, D, E, and I was like, nope, because this just makes me feel like you've looked at the best numbers, maybe highest conversion, but I want you to go peel the layers of the onion a little bit deeper and look for which segment is it that maybe we're missing out a voice in. And then the conversation changes from numbers / ROI to more value, which is far more imminent and important to the brand, because you're trying to create a relationship that's longer lasting. So when we look at it from an inclusivity lens, so there's no reason to say that we're only going to look at people who don't have numbers. Yes, there might be a certain person who is representing a certain part of our audience who has been excluded, and which is why we would include it. To the point where, and I think it's a great call out to the corporates for them to also be more conscious about the fact that numbers does not necessarily translate into results, which has been probably in the past. So thank you for asking this important and slightly question, maybe in this environment, to ask. And I want to encourage maybe even the other brands to look at it from an inclusivity lens, because perspectives we might have so many ideas that overlap, but none of us has a monopoly of ideas. And inclusivity just brings it, it completes the pie, as I'd like to say. And some pieces of the pie might be very tiny, but without them, it'll still not be a full circle. So the whole idea is to go full circle, representative of what your user might be. So at a corporate level, I guess, is it being looked at? In many places, yes, and I think that's quite the common answer, just with a different spin on it from each individual. Thanks.
I hope you've answered your question to this aspect. Maybe what I can ask, do you have the Wauzi representative on the house? Ah, okay. Ah, okay. I thought they will speak more to the influencer part of it, but it's okay. Yes. Okay.
My question will be, and good to see you, Devine. As someone who has been in a humanitarian space, I don't sit pretty well when I hear influencers. And when I listen to you talking, it's about numbers, it's about conversions, it's about marketing, it's about brand placement. But when I look at the flip side, and your question about COVID, how many brands are looking at the impact of COVID and the future of work? The question we don't get to hear nowadays is, how are our employees? Do we have wellness? Do we have because there's a lot of impact in terms of mental draining, burnout, especially in the creative and the digital agencies. But that story is not being told. Being in the humanitarian space, we've seen a lot of young creatives battling depression, battling burnout, but that conversation is not being discussed. Where you see corporates are putting numbers first, corporates are putting brands first. So I'm really keen to see the future of work where people are working from home, but we don't get to see mechanisms to actually cushion families on how they can take screen time off, how they can spare time with their families. That's one thing which I'm actually seeing, which is people are actually grappling with. Then, do we have influencers for good? Because we're seeing influencers who will not post anything without being paid. Do we have influencers who can actually say, hey, I think I need to raise voice against 1, 2, 3, 4. So we find we have a bunch of young generation who will not push anything until they're actually paid. I think that's where we are going. So we are focused more on brand placement, brand marketing, but we're focusing on the human impact and actually change on the society.
Maybe to answer that question, I'll maybe split it into 4. So we start with creative, then we go to, in terms of data, now maybe Shika can answer that, then we go to brand. So I think we go with you first.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for bringing that up. It is a significant problem in the creative space, mental health, that is. Depression numbers are through the roof. I think in the last couple of years, there have been a significant number of suicides as well. If we're being honest with ourselves, alcohol and drug abuse has gone up. Now, the reality is that will change, as you said, when there's less focus on numbers and more focus on the human capital. But that is going to have to take time, and that's the reality. Corporations will evolve based on how society evolves as well. When society puts pressure on corporations to start factoring in mental health, that's when that change will happen. Because when consumers start making decisions based on, are you an organization that actually cares about your people? And if that decision is going to affect your share of my wallet, then corporations are going to start listening. But still, to be very honest, as I said, share of wallet, numbers will play a part in that. So people will have to start voting for companies that care about people with their wallets. That's when companies will listen.
Thanks for asking that question, and I'm cognizant it's a reality. I recall sometime around July last year, I had a conversation with a couple of different heads of the creative agencies that we have in Kenya, and one of the common themes that came out was that because a lot of these people are relatively younger, they live alone, they're really struggling to work from home, and they're battling that lack of human connection, not just the social connection which they can obtain from other means. And it was quite alarming, I'll be completely honest. I didn't look at it in that sight. But to add just a little more color, I think this is something that we as larger organizations need to take a bit more responsibility for, because we do it at a company level. Like, I am very fully aware of our employee policy that talks about work-life balance and how to like strike that out, and what are the signs of when you see burnout, and how do you have that conversation with your team around, you know, let's see how you can prioritize. We have a 4D framework, you know, what can you delegate, what can you drop, what can you decide, and there's another D on it. But another thing that maybe I would call out, and I don't know who the right person for this is, but in South Africa, there is actually an accreditation called the BEEE, which is conscious, and it makes sure that an agency who's accredited by the BEEE is compliant on all of the things that are important to the organization. So as an example, it's really hard, but we had to part with our top 3 agencies in South Africa because they were not BEEE accredited. And what that means is they did not have diversity in the people who were looking at creatives. They were discriminating against certain people for certain reasons, which was not forming the overall representation. There was too much of a Me Too or mini-me, as we call it, the mini-me syndrome pool, where just because you know someone who works exactly like you bring them in. And so the ideas start becoming less, fresher. So we're quite conscious about it. And I think this has to come from a regulatory perspective as well, or maybe the other people, important stakeholders within the industry, to take this as a responsibility upon themselves to ensure that while we're standing for this at our own company level, it should surely extend to our agencies, because they are part of creating the dreams that we ultimately, and the campaigns that we ultimately deliver on. So I think it's a responsibility for everyone to take, and for the agencies to also speak up and stand up. And sometimes these conversations are hard, but they're very helpful, and they're able to get you somewhere. Like they say, if you don't ask, you'll never know. What's the worst that'll happen, right? You'll just get a no. But if you don't ask, you'll never know. So I urge you to ever, if you're in those situations and you're seeing this as a pattern, like bring it up and talk about it, because like we say, it's okay not to be okay and to say it. So feel okay not to be okay someday and say, I need to take this time out to do X or Y. I know it's harder, but it's a culture we have to cultivate, and the first few steps are harder, but eventually it becomes easier as we go along.
Maybe, Lucy, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think that was, the question that was asked was very eye-opening. I think we tend to be sort of not blind, but unaware of what could be happening at agency, the fatigue, the depression, all that. And just like Shika said, speaking out helps, because sometimes we may not be privy to what is happening at agency. We might try to do things at an organization level. For example, we partnered with Minet, who are offering therapy sessions for free. We took these out to the public. We had numerous people calling in through that line just to speak to someone because they were going through an addiction, a drug addiction, or through depression or family problems. But it never occurred to us that our partners actually needed this help more than even the public before we, charity begins at home. And if we were aware that these are the things that were actually happening, definitely something would have happened. So I like the point that Shika said that sometimes you also have to hold your agency accountable to your values, because that's a big value for us at ABSA. We even have like Wednesdays where we don't have meetings, small things that make sure that everybody is okay. We have every Friday morning we have mentorship classes where we talk about our emotional connection. We talk with our line managers and our bosses just to know where it is that we are in life. So yeah, it's very eye-opening, and I'm taken back a bit as Lucy, and just trying to be as much as I can to the agency. So that was a really good question.
That's good. As you said, charity begins at home. Maybe Divan can tell us.
Actually, this is so. a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, actually, we're approaching the 3rd anniversary. Internally, we learned the hard way, I think, the need for mental health and being able to be intentional about mental health, not just for, you talked about creatives, but just for the teams internally. And it's something that we've taken seriously because we don't function if our teams are not well, right? And we don't function if our partners are not well. Generally, we don't work with a lot of creatives outside. I mean, we have a very niche and specific number of agencies we work with. But what we've done, for me at least, because the creative team is under my purview, is becoming intentional about their well-being. Because I think my creative team, and I think I have almost like 90% of my team is creatives, they're hit harder. You're used to engaging and working at odd hours. So, this whole loop of being at home really did hit them hard. And, it hit me hard, actually, because I am nocturnal, right? So I am generally a creative who just ended up in the other side of marketing. But it's about, I think, it's not about the corporate, because corporate is made of people. It's actually, my call is to leaders who lead creative teams, is to be the eye and ear to the needs of your team and to the needs of your creative team, because it's easy for them to get lost. And it's easy for them to be very happy when, and I was going to speak French, but when things really get hard. So my call is not just the organization. I think the organizations will do what the organizations, and you have principals and you have whatever. But at the end of the day, the responsibility of somebody's well-being is the person who is responsible for them. And that's the leader, that's the manager. And so for me, it's just being conscious that I lead a creative team and burnout is real. And we support an entire organization across 18 countries. So it's generally possible very easily for them to get burnout. So it's to check in, make sure they're taking a break, enforce the break sometimes, because it's easy for creatives to be like, I'm fine, I'll create it. I'll sleep for 2 hours and then I'll come back. That you just make sure that you're responsible for the well-being as much as the corporate business is also maybe putting principles and processes in place for mental health.
Thank you for that. I think the creatives in team, in the room you've had. So if you want to have that mental guidance, Lucy has said wellness. Lucy has said she has something that they do for free. Yeah. Is it open to public or just ABSA?
No, it was open to the public, but it expired. But yeah, we are always partnering with such institutions to provide help internally and externally.
Any other question? Have we answered your question? It's not even listening. Clearly.
My name is David. Thank you for this opportunity. My question would be more of, when it comes to communication, the visual communication, I think it depends on organizations, because let's say in a real estate company, you're selling an off-plan project. The end consumer is someone who might have should have trusted the developer and stuff like that. There's a process. So by the time you are creating something that you'd want to convert and you want to base it on the advert itself, I don't know, what are some of the things that you try put in line, not forgetting the main people who will determine the end product, which are the developers, the architects, and all that. But here we are in the marketing side of it. You want to put something that will be visual, will communicate to the end user, and still look value to the brand. Because you going out as a brand, but whatever you marketing, you also don't have the 100% assurity of whatever you're saying is what will be delivered. Maybe some things that you as a creative, you put into place before presenting out there, because it's something long-term, but eventually effect to your brand and also your reputation as an individual.
Maybe Alem, you want to answer that in
Yeah,
1 minute?
So when a brief comes to my desk and I'm selling something like a tangible, like a construction or a house, a building, I try and look at the intangibles. What does it mean to someone? You see, it's a home, for example. What does someone want in that kind of space? Well, the other element you asked about was something off-plan, which again then, for me, what comes to mind first as well is you have to show value to the individual. So I think you have to show the person, you have to tug on the heartstrings, first and foremost. Show them I'm not selling you a building, I'm selling you a home. I'm selling you a compound where your son can run if it's your newly born child. I'm selling you a space where you can have family barbecues and all of these different things that come with owning a property like that. So it's not just the building, what it means to the person. But then as well, you have to show them the value. Because if I cannot afford it, I cannot afford it. But it's showing that I'm giving you this great feeling for this beautiful price.
As a marketer, I would say it's two things. One is the promise. Second is the credibility, to be able to deliver on that promise. Because most people would probably doubt the credibility. And so if there's credibility that ties into the promise, which can be proven from precedents, then that probably solves that dilemma.
Lucy, 30 seconds.
I'll just add to the credibility. So if you're struggling to pass a message because something seems off plan and in your mind you have a question, it might not. You're questioning it and wondering if it's going to bring the value. I mean, the product that you have in mind, there's some trust issues as a creative and even as maybe an employee, and maybe that's something you need to dig deep into. Do you believe in the organization? Because as an employee, you have to buy into the brand or what their promise is, you have to buy into the brand. You yourself have to believe in the brand before you can pass it. And the minute you feel some trust issues within you, trust me, it's going to show in your work. So maybe I think that will be my challenge. But back to Shika's point is the credibility of the organization. And once you understand the credibility and what it is that they're going to deliver, you'll be more than fine. And then now you can go back to selling value as opposed to the image. Yeah.
I think I think they've said everything, because honestly, I was just trying to figure out even how it plays internally. And I'll just use internally because I think our team serves as the agency in the business, so to speak. And if you don't have credibility, and unfortunately, let me say unfortunately, creatives generally are really bad about selling themselves. Like really, I mean, Emron might be an exception, but creative just generally, like you have a hard time, that trust, building credibility. There's also a sense of, see me, I'm a creative. So I say you create, you take it, you don't. But we are very bad at selling ourselves, selling trust or building or cultivating trust. And that, if you don't have that, especially in an organization, and an organization that has, maybe they're empowered, like teams are empowered to just either take it up or not, right? It will be very hard. So you need to figure out, how do I actually build and cultivate trust? And what is it that they need that I have? And what is it that I have? That reciprocity, right? There's that angle of whenever you're working, especially in a team dynamic. But if you don't have credibility, and if you don't work at it because you assume, because you're a creative, that you have it, you won't go anywhere.
Great. I think we've answered you well. I think if there's no other question, we've come to the end of our session. Thank you to my panelists. You've done well.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience for listening to us. We appreciate the time you've taken to be with us. It's been, I hope it wasn't boring. It's taken long that we thought. Oh. Oh, okay. Oh. So, yeah. Rita? We are good? Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.